favor? Opposed? Carried, thank you. There still being no delegations, I'm assuming.
I'm not a delegate, I can tell you that.
There you go. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Councillor Ranta?
I would like to see sent correspondence added to the agendas, under the current, information correspondence category, item 8. I just am interested in seeing the sent correspondence on the agendas from this time forward, for open business. So I move that, the, sent correspondence, that's council correspondence, be included in the agenda packages.
Second motion?
So that's letters, or not including emails, I presume. Letters that are sent by council from the village of Cache Creek to anybody.
That are pertaining to business that would be considered on a public agenda.
Thank you. Will that work for you? Whatever.
Okay.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Sorry, who's the seconder for that?
Dave.
Thank you.
Is there any other business arising from the minutes? Seeing none. Committee reports, economic development, Councillor Dubois.
Nothing at this time.
Thank you. Budget and administrative services. I would move that council approve village office to close from December 23rd to 27th inclusive, and from noon to 4:30 on December 31st.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. On to bylaw and policy review, Councillor Ranta.
Okay, so we have item number 1, bylaw 2-018, 2024-2025 utility rates. And I'll move the motion on the agenda that council get first, second, and third readings to bylaw 2-018, 2024-2025 utility rates as presented.
Second.
Discussion? I guess my reading of the agenda leads me to believe that in the waste collection component, there's a 20% increase.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And certainly what we used to do is recognize that we have a massive great landfill in the village of Cache Creek and utilize some of the revenue from the landfill in order to offset the cost of waste management in the village. And so I would move that we adjust the waste collection rate so that it is.
There's a motion on the table. Is this an amendment to the motion?
I don't know what the
There's a motion on the table, so is this a proposed amendment to the motion?
No,
Or is this another motion?
it's not another motion, it's discussion.
Okay. Well, you said I would move.
Yeah, I did say that, my mistake, I'm sorry. I recognize there's a motion on the table, but I suppose what I would suggest is an amendment to the motion to reduce the 20% increase in the waste collection down to something more palatable, which I think would be 10% at most. Is there a seconder or an amendment?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Councillor Dubois.
I'd like to hear from staff how they came up with some of the numbers, and in particular, the waste, the cost for the waste.
Yeah.
Well, the way I got to the numbers, I entered,
Your body will fall.
So I, based on the inflationary rate, I kind of estimated what would be the costs for the year. And then I entered as if the current rates are going to be kept on. And I wanted to see what would be the incremental difference to break even. And so that's where I got a 20% increase, which is actually a $13 a year or a $3 a month practically increase, because I do understand that we have a landfill and we can subsidize the waste collection. But we all know what happened in 2017 when the landfill didn't produce revenue and we didn't have the revenue to offset the expenses, and we were running like $500,000 a year deficit. Excuse me. And so the other thing is that we don't have any reserves in the waste collection, and in about 3, maybe 4 years, we have to replace the garbage truck, and we literally have no reserves, and the cash garbage truck is about $500,000. So having all those considerations, I recommended, and then it's up to the council to decide if that's a reasonable increase. I recommended 20% to break even. For the water and sewer, yeah, the increases are capped at 2.5, which is kind of an inflationary increase. But for example, this year, just we were talking about the breaking the infrastructure, and I just showed the emergency repairs up to date in 2024 for both waste and for the sewer and for the water. We are at $15,000 in contingency repairs that, you know, considering what's happening tonight and what happened last week, and I don't have the bills yet, I cannot even come to terms how much over the budget we are going to be with infrastructure repairs. And that's why, even though we are beyond the break-even point, but because we don't have reserves to cover for infrastructure repairs or give us the ability to do more planned infrastructure changes to kind of avoid situations like this, I made those recommendations. But again, it's up to the council to agree with them or suggest anything else.
Councilor Peters.
I just have a couple of questions on some of the numbers, under water collection, R&M and supply, pardon me, R&M and supplies, 271,000, whereas the other two are considerably lower. There's 150,000, or yeah, 150,000 between the sewer estimates and the water estimates. Is that to account for some of those?
No, I have the contingency for emergency repairs 2 lines down, and that's, I budgeted for 15,000, even though this year it's obviously way over. But I went with the figures that I kind of went last year. But repair, maintenance, and supply for the water distribution and collection is it has to do a lot more with the treatment of the water to make it to bring it to the consumption level to be acceptable by the interior health. And also for the sewage, I reduced considerably the cost because we are going to have the centrifuge. We got the turnkey, so all those costs that we had last year and up to this year that were for the sludge removal, now there won't be. So I had to reduce that cost to reflect the new upgrade to the plant.
And then my second question, kind of on the same thing, is the operations costs for the sewer treatment plant, the disparities in both operations and salaries and benefits.
Salaries and benefits. Yeah, so these are, for the salaries and benefits, we are just going through union negotiation, and so there are some proposals on the table, and I had to kind of use some conservative assumptions that I feel that may come to an agreement. It doesn't necessarily mean that those are going to be the actual, maybe the actual is going to be less, but I want it to be conservative so I don't go over the budget and all of a sudden come to be in a deficit position.
I guess my question is
for the
partly the amounts,
operations.
but the difference in the amounts between
Like-
water and sewage.
I can answer that one specifically on the salaries and benefits. The wastewater treatment plant has more manual processes, so it requires more staff time to be present, whereas the water treatment plant is a little bit more automated.
Point of order. If I recall, we're discussing an amendment to the utility rates to reduce the waste collection increase from 20% to 10%. And I think that's what we should be talking about or focused on. Councillor Dubois.
I would be in support of the 20% rather than the 10%. I believe that we need to be looking at what we're doing for waste collection, and I appreciate in the past, there has been diversion from the landfill funds to cover this, but where we are right now is we need to see that all of our utilities are standing up on their own, and they need to be looked after and ensure that we're developing appropriate reserves, and I think this move at 20% helps us to do that, to build those reserves where they need to be, considering that we do need to look at purchasing some significant equipment in the near term, in the next 5 years or so. So I think leaving it at 20% would be more appropriate.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Ramda?
Well, it might seem confusing to some people to observe me seconding the motion and then voting against the amendment. Is the philosophically my approach to the landfill revenue is that we need to be able to utilize it in ways that aren't for core services, and that the landfill revenue shouldn't be assumed and baked into the budget in a way where we couldn't really stand on our own 2 feet without it. So because it is volatile, it's been volatile over time. So I also see, it does kind of concern me that the reserves in as CFO Martini explained, that the reserves in waste collection are at 0, which is not really a sustainable amount. So I will be voting against the amendment.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? The lonely guy again. Opposed? Defeated. Thank you. On the motion, not as amended. Discussion, Councillor Peters.
So back to the difference, okay, that explains part of it. Do we have, I think I've asked this question in the past too, do we have a figure or a feel for how many hours per week on average they should be spending in each of the plants? And do we use that as a kind of budgeting tool to say, okay, 20 hours a week is what's allotted to wastewater. Anything over that has to be approved, like those kinds of controls. Do we have anything like that in place?
We do have general guidelines in place, especially for when the primary operators aren't there. But a lot of things come up. Right now, there's a lot of extra hours in wastewater, like hours that may be billed as public works normally, but they're being billed as wastewater right now because of all the projects that are ongoing, and the processes are a bit more involved because the outflow isn't working correctly. So it's a little bit more manual work. So that's why right now specifically we're seeing a higher amount until those issues are dealt with. Secondary with water, in the past little bit, like whenever there's a water line break, suddenly everyone's billing for water at the same time that's working on that specific line break. That could be 2, 3, 4 people all working at the same time, so those hours add up pretty quick. Thankfully, we don't have as many breaks with wastewater. Actually, I can't recall one since being here, thankfully. But we've had quite a few amount of water ones. So
Thank you.
to answer your question, yes, but there's still a lot more that goes into the numbers yet.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the main motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Oh, the lonely guy again. Carry on, Councillor Ranta.
Okay, so item number 2 is bylaw number 6-008, zoning amendment 2024. And the motion on the agenda, I'll move the motion on the agenda that council give final consideration to and adopt bylaw number 6-008, zoning amendment 2024.
Second?
Any discussion? Councillor Dubois?
I will be voting in favor of this, but I am concerned about how we are going to allow usage of containers in our community. And I think that it's something that maybe the bylaw and policy review committee would like to take a look and figure out what we should be looking at down the road in terms of ensuring that we're getting quality installations and not sort of eyesores that are kind of impacting what we see within our community.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Look, there goes Bill.
Yeah, come on.
And moving on?
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to item number 3, C3, draft policy number F-5, Fire Chief Class A dress uniform. And I move that council approve policy number F-5, Fire Chief dress, or Class A dress uniform as presented.
Second.
Discussion? There was something here. I can just find it. Item 4, budgeting and funding. The 1,500 allocation per eligible uniform purchase shall be included in the fire department's annual budget. And it's something that they only do every 5 years. So I think that is sort of confusing. Somebody reading that could say, oh, we need to put 1,500 in every year. And I think it should be reworded in some manner. You can do that, eh?
Yep.
Thank
We
you.
could look at changing that one line, if that's what everybody wants.
That's all I saw that I was concerned about, Councillor Ranta.
Yeah, I agree, because this is not really meant to be, I think that if there was a transition in staff and council, that there would be kind of the policy would kind of fade into the distance about the other aspects of how we wanted this to roll out, so I agree with that one, but thank you. Yeah, I think that does need changing, because in a world where it's annually added, I think it just doesn't maybe reflect the intention, considering it's brand new, but yeah.
Then we'll leave it up to the administrator to amend it.
Yeah, I can make a change. The reason why we thought to have it annually in the budget is because if there's a change in fire chief any given year, then we need to make that purchase that year. And if it's not in the budget, we have to bring it to council, which overrides the purpose of having policy. With a lot of line items, if we don't use a whole amount, it just doesn't get spent. But that is why we put that line in. We could change it to maybe as a reserve, but then we're creating a reserve.
Why don't we just put it when there is a chief change,
Mhm.
or every 5 years, wherever is reasonable.
It says.
Councillor Dubois.
I think, point 1, eligibility, I think it states quite clearly when you're eligible to get it. I don't see any harm with leaving it in the budget if it's gonna make it easier for staff. It says on the election of a new chief and or after 5 years of service. So I think that covers those eventualities. If it's in the budget and they don't use it, that's fine, but I'd rather see it there than having to come back to council for it each time.
Thank you. Councillor Peters.
It also says unused portions of the uniform allowance may not be carried forward or used for non-uniform purposes, so if it doesn't get used, it's not lost.
Thank you. Councillor Ranta.
Well, considering those explanations, I'm okay with the way it is.
I'll be on my own again. Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Public Works, Councillor Hebert.
Nothing new to report at this time.
Thank you. Healthcare and Protective Services. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering if we can get a bit of an update. I've been noticing that we've been having a number of buoyant alerts related to water breaks. I'm just wondering if staff can provide some commentary on what's going on.
I've been meaning to do an actual report about everything that's going on, but then another thing happens that kind of, long story short, like I'm planning to have, when we stop having one every week, I'm planning to have an actual written report that outlines everything. But long story short, we've been having a lot of water issues. We've had a few instances where it's supposed to be simply we go turn off a curb stop so that somebody can do maintenance inside their home or business, and we go to turn off the curb stop, it doesn't happen. We then have to dig down, do a whole bunch of work. So turning a 10-minute job into a 2-day job, we've had a couple of those. We had some planned maintenance of a valve that we knew that was failing last week, like Wednesday last week, we were attempting to do that. It suddenly, very rapidly became a much bigger project. So that resulted in some of the issues near the end of last week, Thursday, Friday last week. And today also we had a preventative work at specifically Project 25 from the recovery plan, which involves from the previously damaged line that goes from the Sandman Inn underneath the river to where the old Super Save was. When that was decommissioned, it was all decommissioned and everything was done on the south side, but Project 24 is on the north side and installs a blow-off to properly decommission the other side, rather than just relying on a valve that isn't working correctly, that's had a leak since that period of time. So with all that in mind, we were planning to do that work today. We thought that we could isolate with one valve. We weren't able to. Move back to another, weren't able to, so we had to isolate a significant portion of town in order to be able to do that work. And even then, it's not fully isolating. So of the 3 valves that we ended up having to actually turn off to stop this, at least one of them is still not completely closing. And so it took a long time for the system to depressurize to the point where they could safely do work. And that's a contractor doing the one today as part of a recovery project, they're very skilled. They've done this a lot, and they're just like, what the heck? So yeah, the plan is to consolidate everything into a report. But long story short, there's been a lot of those, and there's been a lot of interesting things that we've been finding underground. Interesting prior practices. Not trying to insult anybody from the past. It was allowable at the time. Codes and standards have changed, and so now when we go into the situation, we're seeing these things that are very difficult. We're having to update it to the current standards, and so that takes extra time and money.
Councillor Dubois.
Can you comment on what types of policies and procedures you have in terms of ensuring you've got supplies to be able to do those repairs and maintaining a proper inventory?
Yeah, we don't have a formal policy on the stock level that we have. It's inherently difficult just because there's like with water specifically, there's 4 different types and sizes of material that we use. So each one of those, most of them require a different type of valve, but not all. And then secondary to that, there's so many different sizes. So we do have a pretty good assortment, especially the common sizes, like say household connections and that sort of thing that we typically see, like the half, 3/4, 1-inch connections. We have a lot of those in stock. But when we start getting into the bigger pipes around town, we have some areas that are like 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch. Those are quite a bit more expensive to stock. Part of the budget with water includes like the supply budget includes having a bit more, like a deeper stock. Not much, but like say 1 more of each valve, because we usually have 1 of any given type of valve on hand, not plural of a given valve on hand. The other thing is some of our suppliers are having difficulty getting some items. So we're having to use stuff that we normally wouldn't want to. Like for example, we just had a replacement of a corp stop, which is the connection that connects directly to the actual water main. And we had to use a type of saddle that has very low clearance. So it only has like about an inch of overlap. So if it's asbestos coated or asbestos cement pipe, so if there's any kind of crack or deformation, it can leak very easily. And so we did that, installed that on Friday, and there's a leak on it today. So it's still functioning and doing its job, but it is leaking. So we're trying to source a new, bigger saddle that can cover, say, like a foot or foot and a half area to get a better seal. But nobody has them in the interior. So that's some of the issues that we're coming across.
Councillor Hebert.
How often do we check these valves?
To be honest with you, never. And it's never been a practice. And it certainly should. Yeah, it's something that we've been discussing, adding to regular maintenance, checking all the main valves in town. Because there's 10 that are critical valves, and then there's a lot that isolate, say, 1 or 2 streets in the community. And a lot of those 1 or 2 street ones aren't working. And when we're going to them, it seems like they've never been open. Like 10 plus years that they haven't been touched. So.
Thank you. Councillor Dubois.
Just wondering, what will be the impact of having an asset management plan in place to sort of identify these, ensure that the maintenance is being done? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so we're onboarding an asset management program. We do have an inventory of all the valves. We don't have an inventory of the condition of them all. We know where they all are. We know how many we have. We're learning the sizes. We're just going through records to kind of make that determination. That'll help us with inventory levels. And then also we're starting the process now and keeping track of this valve doesn't close properly or doesn't open properly. It has this issue. Keeping track of that and attaching it to the actual item. Right now it's an entirely paper-based system, which is incredibly difficult to deal with and manage, but we're transitioning that to a digital system that will have a historical log of all the maintenance records that we create for it, replacement schedules, and also show like the initial installation and that sort of thing. So if a valve was installed in 1973, which most of ours are like 60s, 70s, 80s, most of our stuff, we can see that it was installed in 1973. We can see that we have 10 of those valves that are that old, 9 of them have failed. Maybe we should replace number 10 or something in lines with that. It'll give us a priority list over what we should be tackling, and then also seeing it on different mapping programs, which we're playing around with right now, but our mapping program that we use currently, it shows all the different connections, but it doesn't show, or it shows in a map where everything is, but it doesn't show like finite connections. So say for example, you might have a T in a water line, and some of our valves might only isolate 2 of the 3 sides intentionally. That's the case with some of our critical valves. It's to say, if you turn it a certain way, it'll turn the T down to encompass the lower 2 portions. Those ones are A, more difficult to test. B, we don't know which ones they are, because the record keeping hasn't been as great as we would like with those. So we're sorting through all that as well, because otherwise we would be able to identify, like for this portion of town, if we want to be able to isolate, like do a scenario, like if we isolate this street, what valves need to turn off? If we isolate this one, what do we need to turn off? But we can't really do that right now, just because there's so many of those in the field that we aren't quite sure their function. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on public works? Seeing none, on to healthcare and protective services, Councillor Manta.
Okay, so there was a HAWK meeting earlier today, and there were 9 members present and 2 interior health representatives. We had Yvonne Taylor, the Director of Clinical Operations for Interior Health, and then the regional manager was also on the call. It's again a new person, so they always have, it seems, a very high rate of staff change in overseeing the local UPCC. Just about every meeting I go to, there's a different representative managing. However, the good news is that this one lives in 100 Mile and is used to rural settings and has 15 years experience in healthcare, so they seemed kind of interested in doing a good job, so that was good. There is a new doctor coming, Hampreet Singh, to the UPCC soon, so that's good news. There are also, Interior Health is looking at supporting nurses to become nurse practitioners in the rural settings, so even though our UPCC isn't considered remote in their books, I think they're realizing that there's a need to encourage and support that training. Yeah, and then one of the questions Interior Health had for Ashcroft and Cache Creek, which Jessica answered really well for Ashcroft, I didn't really have a lot of clarity on what I should say other than I didn't think Cache Creek would likely be supporting a shelter for extreme cold situations. I didn't really think that would be within our capacities, but they did mention the Equality Project and work that they probably were doing in that area. And then there was a mention of something called the Mayor's Coalition on Health Care for this area, which I think we should find out a little bit more about. I'm not sure if the mayor is connected with that group. I think it's spearheaded by mayors from local communities surrounding us. And then the group did have some good questions. One of them was pertaining to the health planning table, which I did attend a couple of times, which is like a regional multi-partner conversation with Interior Health and local concerns, and that seems to be paused, and the group is advocating that it maybe shouldn't be. And Interior Health has something called HR Stabilization Group, which is a management group that's obviously concerned about recruitment and retention, and they're seeing kind of our known problem of housing and childcare being challenges to recruitment in rural communities in our area. So that's the report from the meeting today.
Thank you. On to emergency management, Councillor Peters.
The only thing is we have a new emergency management and cabinet minister that was announced today, so Ms. Ma, who stood by us very she stood by us very well during our trials and tribulations of the last few years. She's moved on to another portfolio, so we will be making contact with the new cabinet minister and moving forward from that.
Who was it?
I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry. Minister Farnsworth is now the Minister of Transportation.
Oh, yeah.
And Walrus was,
I can't remember.
the three that we're dealing with mostly with the flooding issues are all new. But with history, so that's good.
Thank you. On to Parks and Recreation, Councillor Ranta.
Stay tuned for an upcoming meeting. We do need to schedule a meeting very shortly here. One of the topics will be activities over the winter and other things.
Thank you. Landfill Advisory Committee, I have nothing to report. TNRD and Intergovernmental Liaison, there was a meeting, whenever it was, back on, I think a week ago Thursday, but I'll just find out for you. November the 8th. On pages 6 to 151 was the 5-year capital plan, and so I was rather interested in that. And the second highest expenditure that the TNRD makes after general governmental services, which is $24.5 million annually, is solid waste and recycling. And the expense for solid waste and recycling for the TNRD is $13.7 million. And so in looking at that, and in looking at the proposed 11.6% increase in solid waste and recycling, and the fact that there's an $11.2 million reserve balance, and what they're planning to do is take 600,000, 500, 350, 250, and 100,000 out in 25, 6, 7, 8, and 9. That still leaves 9,427,000. And so I thought, in order to reduce the impact of the double-digit waste management cost in spite of those transfers from reserves, I thought, why don't we take another 100,000 in 2025 and 2026 and reduce the impact, because the proposed increases are 11.6 and 15.7% in 2025 and 2026. But that didn't go anywhere either. And you know, why do we need $9.4 million? And even after all the proposed capital expenditures are done, there's still $3.287 million in reserve in 2029, which is 21.7% of the annual budget, which is, it struck me as being rather excessive. And in spite of that, it didn't go anywhere. And the increase for the village of Cache Creek is 10.52%, I think it is, something like that, for the village of Cache Creek cost for TNRD. And I've got the village of Cache Creek 2024 tax rates. The total is $63.97 per 100,000 of assessed value, and for 2025, the total is $70.70, 10.5% increase, and the highest by far cost of the services that benefit the village of Cache Creek is the solid waste management, which is what I focused on trying to transfer out of reserves, which we have mega of, and it just didn't work. So I'm sorry, the solid waste management budget goes from $34.39 per 100,000 of assessed value to $38.61 per 100,000, which is a 12% increase in 1 year. And that, to me, is, I just find it difficult to handle double-digit tax increases, and I've been consistent in that for many, many years. So here ends my report on TNRD. Happy to answer any questions. Not seeing any, on to...
I just have one quick thing. There's a fair, CEO Couture and I will be attending a fair transit meeting with Clinton and Ashcroft tomorrow. So I'll report to that after the meeting.
Thank you. On to Cache Creek Community Fund, Councillor Dubois.
Nothing to report at this time.
Thank you. Staff report, anything? Nothing on the agenda. Information correspondence. I would move that we receive and file the letter or the news release from School District 74.
Second.
Discussion.
Just like congratulate Councillor Ranta on her re-election as co-chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Look, I voted for something. Any new business? Seeing no new business, questions from the public? Yes.
I'm wondering what the status of the swimming pool is. Is the circulation pump still working, or is it shut off?
The circulation pump is off now.
Okay. Any plans for dismantling?
Not yet. We still, there's a grant that we're applying for to look at a recreation plan. That's kind of phase one, because we would likely need to make a plan for what happens next, to make a determination on what within the pool facility is staying, what's going, and then that would be the next step.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the public? Seeing none, questions from the press?
Nope, nothing today.
Nothing. We have need of a closed session pursuant to section 90.1 and 90.2 of the community charter. Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Brief break and we'll come back in camera.